everyone, and welcome to our segment of Rare Book Cafe Coffee Break. The new way that we're doing Rare Book Cafe, where we feature one guest at a time and have a chance to really focus on what they have to share with us. Our guest today is Gigi Best. Gigi has been part of Rare Book Cafe since the start, the very start. She is the owner, along with her husband Skip, of the Best Richardson African Diaspora Literature and Culture Museum. And I think after all these years, Gigi, I finally memorized it. But today, and Gigi's focus has always been on the study of what had happened to Africans when they came to this country, particularly those of her family. She has traced genealogies back, oh gosh, as far as she could go, I think. And her latest venture is with, I'm not sure how long has this society been in existence, Gigi?
2 years. It started in 2019.
Okay. This is and I'm going to try to get this right because I wrote it
Mm-hmm.
down. The Society for the First African Families of English America, of which Gigi is the historian general. And we're
Right.
so proud of you, along with all your many other honors and accomplishments on the national level now. And she's going to share with us something. She has a slideshow to share with us about the society and what's going on with them and what's going on with her studies of her particular family. So Gigi, I'm going to let you take it away. And if Alan and I have questions, we'll just cut in.
Okay, sounds good. Greetings, everyone. You hear a lot about 1619, and you hear negative connotations or people saying it didn't exist. And I am a witness that the 20 and odd did exist. My ninth great grandmother is Margaret Cornish, and she was one of the 20 and odd that came into Virginia in 1619. And this organization that I belong to, it's a hereditary society, and I belong to several, including Daughters of the American Revolution, First Families of North Carolina. But this one's really unique because it concentrates on a history that you don't hear much about. So the Africans that came to Virginia and ended up in Jamestown were stolen from King Nzinga. There's actually a movie on her now. I think you can see it on Hulu. And these Angolans were stolen by the Portuguese. And as you can see, the map, Angola's on the map that you see before you. These Africans that came here were not aboard a Dutch ship as reported by John Rolfe. And everybody knows who John Rolfe was, and those who don't, he was the husband of Pocahontas, and he also raised tobacco. He found the people that came here, and the White Lion, they were on that ship, and that ship was sailing with letters of marque, and they were issued by the English captain Jope. These letters legally permitted the White Lion to sail as a privateer, which is a pirate ship, and they were English, and they were attacking the Spanish and Portuguese ships they encountered. So the 20 and odd Africans were captives removed from the Portuguese slave ship, the San Juan Batista, following an encounter with the White Lion and the treasurer. So while attempting to deliver these African prisoners to Mexico, they arrived on the James River 20 August 1619. And that's why we say before the Mayflower, because the Mayflower didn't land in Massachusetts to 1620. So SOFAFIA, which is the acronym for the Society of the First Africans of English America, it says that their arrival was recorded by John Ralph, as I said. And people who say, oh, well, this didn't happen, all they have to do is read the documents that were written back in 1619. And John Rolfe actually wrote a letter. And because they were expecting, the English were given permission to sack the Portuguese ships and also the Spanish ships. And they were given this opportunity by England. So each time they thought they attacked a ship, they thought they were going to get gold or different precious metals, but they didn't on this trip. And so that's why John Rolfe said there was nothing but 20 and odd Negroes. And these people were sold for victuals to at actually Point Comfort, which is now Fort Monroe. So the members of Sophia descend from men, women, and children who arrived on these shores as early as August 1619. Our ancestors answered our nation's call to every major American conflict beginning in the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Our ancestors, whether they were freed or enslaved, from Lexington to Concord to Bunker Hill to Valley Forge of Yorktown, aided in founding this great nation. If anyone knows anything about Jamestown, they know that the people were actually starving in the streets at that time because of lack of food. They didn't know how to plant. So when these Africans came, they did a lot for establishing these United States. My English great-grandfather, his name was Thomas Bess. He was also there at this time. And when they had a uprising by the Powhatans, he survived that uprising, so his name was on a census. So he came in 1622 and went and got the rest of his, he married and went back to England and brought his family. So those are my ancestors too. So they were all there around the same time. These are just some of the things, reasons why this organization was founded. As I said, I'm in the DAR, Colonial Dames of the 17th Century, various hereditary societies. And it's important to me to document these families because of what they did to help establish English America. So if you go to Jamestown, you will see this highway marker. And it says the first documented Africans in mainland English America arrived at Point Comfort. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, they weren't the first Africans because I'm here in St. Augustine that was established in 1565. And they were Africans here in St. Augustine. So it kind of dispels the myth. It's just that the ones in English America were able to be traced. My ancestors, the Cornish, Sweat, Locust, and Kecoughtan. Margaret Cornish was my 9th great grandmother, who was one of those 20 and odd. So when I do my research, I go to the different counties and parishes, courthouses, and this is a picture of me in front of the Charles City County, Virginia sign. Okay, so my family is the Lucas Locust family, and what I found out is even though my 9th great grandfather his name was John Kecoughtan, he was indentured. During this time in 1619, early 1600s, there was no chattel slavery, so most of these Africans who were captured were treated as indentured servants. So if you'll see on the fourth line down, John Kekatan, a Negro servant to Mr. Rice Ho. And what we were able to discover, a cousin and I, that he was part Kekatan Indian, and that's where he got his last name from. And eventually they dropped the Kekatan and just went to Tan. And so that family can be traced till today. This Rice Ho, as a comparison to my great grandfather, who was Thomas Best, his indentureship he signed himself was only for 5 years, and he was English. But Jack, who was, as I say, not English, he was indentured originally for 17 years. And then the son of Rice Ho, after Rice Ho deceased, tried to keep him for more years. So he ended up serving 29 years. And during this time, they say that he was refractory and disobedient. This is Rice Ho Jr., but he had people who witnessed that he was, I guess, an honest servant doing what he was supposed to do. And the son, after his father died, just wanted to keep him. But he was a smart man. He went to court to fight for his freedom, and he was able to get it. So this is just some information about the Kekatan Tan family. And he became a historian, a genealogist. He wrote a book about the free African Americans in America. And so he listed John Kekatan. Now, John Kekatan had 2 wives. So with his first wife, that was the Tan family. But my ancestors became Lucas because they weren't married, and Elizabeth, she was an English servant maid. They weren't married, so all of our Lucas Locust clan took her last name, and till today, none of them were ever enslaved. There was a law that said that if a child was born from a free woman, and that didn't matter if she was English or African or Native, as long as that family could prove they descend from her, they were free. And my family was able to prove that. So, as we know, we're all involved with books. And so people have written on this and the arrival of the first Africans in Virginia. This book was written by Rick Murphy, who's actually my 5th cousin, and he is the president general of this society. And they did the first inaugural edition. They completed that, and it's a journal that's going to come out annually. So I have an article in that edition that takes my family back further than my book, Thomas the Melungeon, goes back past there. He fought in the Civil War, and it goes all the way back to my ancestor who fought in the Revolutionary War. So these were 2 interesting articles I found. This one, 1619, Virginia's First Africans, is a very interesting article. It names the Africans who were there when the census were taken. They believe some of them died, of course, as some of the English died. And I found it very interesting. And the other article I have a copy of here is 1619, Virginia's First Africans, via Portuguese colony of Angola from the kingdom of Ndungo. And they were taken from Queen Nzinga on the Kwanzaa River. So either one of these articles are very interesting, and the books, of course, are very interesting. Other books have been written, but those are the ones that I highlighted, and we carry those in our bookstore. So that's the end of the presentation. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. You were saying that that 20 odd,
20 and odd.
Yeah, 20 and odd, that those were considered indentured servants.
Most of them.
So that theoretically, after their indenture was over, they would be freed.
Yes.
Did some of them then, the people that they were indentured to, just decide to keep them as forever as slaves?
No.
Okay. So really these first ones did not become slaves?
No. They say there's some that might have, but we don't have proof of that. But they were actually sold for tobacco to the governor.
Okay.
Governor Yeardley at the time, and other high-ranking people. But when you read, like even with Margaret, she was indentured, but she had to pay taxes. Now, enslaved people don't pay taxes.
Right.
And so I have a record where she was exempted from taxes. I think she was about 69, and back then they called that elderly.
No, we don't bother with calling that elderly.
So they exempted her from taxes, so she didn't have to pay taxes. But the one thing that happened, even with these people who were indentured, they were charged, I guess, fees that were discriminatory, and they kept intermarrying with Native, with English people. So after a while, some of them, you could not even tell what their nationality was. So the dilemma in that is that many of them were living as English, but people would tell on them and say, hey, it was the wives they had to pay for, or any women in their house, they had to pay these discriminatory taxes. So the reason why we have such good records is because they were taken to court. And the neighbor would say, hey, he's really of African descent and he's not paying those taxes. So that's how we found a lot of the court records.
So in a way, it was easier to trace these than it would have been with later slaves who were brought here specifically as slaves.
Yeah, people who were enslaved. I say enslaved. I don't call them slaves because when they were brought from their country, they were free. Yes, but they were enslaved here. But yes, it's harder, and it was deliberate. With the enslaved people, if you look on the census, they were on the 1850, 1860 census, and they were just listed, male 25 or female 32. So, and it was deliberately done where they weren't given last names. Some of them took the last names of the enslavers. Some of them, one of my ancestors, he married the locust, a free woman of color, and he was a blacksmith. So he was pretty much free to do a lot because he could travel. But I noticed that he did not appear on the census by name until 1870. And that's what they call the 1870 brick wall.
Okay. So we were wondering, you're going to this conference in another week or so.
Yes.
when you come back, would you be available to do a little follow-up on the conference for us on Rare Book Cafe?
Sure,
So that we
because
can find
it's
out what happened.
yeah, it's something really unique, and it's there's so many, maybe over 100 lineage societies,
Mm-hmm.
but there's only two of them I know of that deal with people of African descent and Native American. And so to belong to one of these, to be able to trace your family, because John Kekatan, I've traced him back to 1665 or earlier when he was born, but those court records, and I have copies of those court records. So it will be interesting because we'll meet other people who have similar histories, and even descendants of very famous people who died in the Revolutionary War. When we talk about Crispus Attucks, for years people didn't know the first man to die in the Revolution was of African descent.
I have a comic book about him.
Oh, do
There
you?
was a series that was done. It's kind of like the comic books that were done of historical characters, and it was of African Americans,
Yes.
and I think I've sold most of them, but I still have the Crispus Attucks one, and
Oh,
which is really neat. And I think the fact that your conference is going to be at the Museum of the Revolution is a wonderful link between uh, the folks that came over in 1619 and what happened later, 100 and something years later, with the revolution. I think that's really a statement that the organization is making.
and they're
Uh,
actually doing there's a special exhibit on Crispus Attucks while we're there. So that will be
we'll
very
be sure and take
exciting.
some pictures,
I will. I
and
will.
we'll look forward to having that on. Um, I I'm curious about one of a book that I currently have is that beautiful book on the Middle Passage by Tom Feelings, with the drawings, the gray and black drawings of scenes from the Middle Passage. And I'm kind of curious about, is there any record of what conditions were like for these folks who were coming over in 1619? I know that privateers had the right, that was a long-standing tradition with the English, that they could be named as a privateer and had, particularly during wars with the French and the Spanish, had the right to attack any ship
Right.
flying those flags. But I wondered what, once they boarded the San Juan Bautista and discovered, well, all we have are people, what their thoughts were then. And, did they treat them as enslaved people?
Yes, they were
How did,
actually
how did they, or did he see this? Oh, this is a wonderful money-making opportunity for me.
no.
Okay.
They virtually didn't know what to do with
What to
these
do with them.
people. Yeah. And it didn't and somebody has said to me one time, well, I couldn't figure out why they had this big ship with only, they called it the 20 and odd, but it was actually 32.
Okay.
And they said, whoever heard of this few people being on a ship? But it was like 350. That's why I said when you read these articles and these books, it was like 350 Africans that were captured, that the Portuguese captured, and they were selling them in different places.
Right.
And then they say out of those ones that came to the shores and Point Comfort, 19 of them died. Many people died during this process, whether it was English people or whether it was African or, whoever was on these ships, because they got terrible diseases. So yes, you read about how some of them were afflicted. You read about, of course, 1607, when they said it was so horrible in Jamestown where people were just dying in the streets.
Right. Well, one of your slides said that I think in 1625, there were only 9 of the original ones left.
Yes.
And which is probably about the same as the original English who were in Jamestown.
Mm-hmm. Because some of them went to different places. Some of them were maybe taken further down stream. The whole area of Jamestown, I say that those Africans saved Jamestown because they came here with skills
Right.
on how to perform. They knew about husbandry, they knew about tobacco, and John Ralph made so much money selling tobacco because the English really, really wanted tobacco and it made them rich. And so they didn't care, who they were having doing the work, because of course the elite didn't care. And even my great grandfather, and it was just a blessing, Thomas Best, he wrote something that they were treating them like enslaved people because his actual indentureship had been sold 4 times. They used to gamble with these pieces of paper, like, these people weren't even human.
Right.
So,
and then that continued, slaves were gambled all the time.
Yes.
Later on, that was seemed to be a common practice. Well, this has been extremely interesting, and we look forward to having you on again after the conference, and as often as you would love to come, because we've always enjoyed having you so much on Rare Book Cafe. So how are things in St. Augustine? Has it been a good move for y'all?
Yes. In fact, we were looking at, it got a little slow during the period, but last month was a very, very good month, because we're kind of like in a nook in the back of a building, but we put signs out and people are like, oh, a bookstore, oh, a museum, and they'll come back there. And right now we're looking at trying to get a larger building. But yes, we're glad we came here. I've learned so much about the Spanish. And, the Spanish had St. Augustine, and then the Americans took it. Then the Spanish took it back. And then, it ended up during the Revolution. And, about Fort Mose and how the Spanish encouraged them to come south, the Africans and the Native Americans, and just parts of the history that I didn't know. And they said we would not have known as much about the 20 and odd if it had not been for the Spanish, because the Spanish kept better records than than the Americans, and the Spanish actually have those records in their archives. And because the Spanish records are in churches, then they still exist. And so,
Well,
yes.
I have some good friends from here in Calhoun who have retired to St. Augustine. And so I'm seriously thinking about a visit down there. And
good. You need to come. You need to come.
I will. So thanks again for being with us. And all of you out there, we'll look forward to seeing you frequently on Rare Book Cafe.
Thank you.